20 years later, the biological son of my adoptive parents reached out to me on Facebook after they disowned me for getting pregnant at 17. When I was just 4 years old, a tragic car accident took my parents away. I don't recall much about the accident itself, but I do remember being in the back seat one moment and then waking up in the hospital the next. As a kid, it was terrifying to open my eyes and see nurses and doctors bustling around. I vividly remember a CPS worker sitting by my bedside, gently explaining that my parents had passed away and had need to live with another family for a while. It was such a confusing and overwhelming time. After that, my life changed a lot. I bounced around different foster homes, none of which ever felt like home to me. Then, when I was 5, I met Lorraine and James. They had been longing for a child of their own, and from the moment we met, I felt their warmth and genuine care. They embraced me fully, filling the void in my heart with love and belonging. Despite the tragic start, I thought I had finally found my second family. When I moved in with Lorraine and James, I quickly noticed that James was incredibly strict and disciplined. Lorraine, on the other hand, seemed to always defer to his authority. I later found out that James was an Army vet who had been injured in action, which explained his need for meticulous planning and execution. Even though I understood where he was coming from, it didn't make it any easier when he raised his voice, especially over small things like being a minute late for church. His strictness often put me on edge, making me feel like I was constantly walking on eggshells to avoid his anger. Lorraine, meanwhile, was more laid back, but had her own issues. She liked to drink when James wasn't around, and I'd see her finish an entire bottle of wine by herself. She always seemed sad and lost in her thoughts, rarely asking about my school or homework. Her days mostly consisted of cooking and cleaning, because James was so insistent on a spotless home. At first, everyone seemed to get along, but as I grew up, I started to see the cracks. I came to realize that James was actually abusive. He was obsessed with my grades, always telling me I needed to do better, and sometimes even slapping me if I didn't meet his expectations. He would threaten to send me back to the orphanage if I didn't perform well, and as a kid, that terrified me because I didn't know it wasn't possible. So, I worked hard to please him, constantly fearing he'd abandon me. Then there was the way he treated Lorraine. They'd argue, and he'd drag her into their bedroom. She'd come out with bruises and punches on her face and hands. I didn't understand at first, but I eventually realized he was physically assaulting her. She never called the police. After their fights, she'd just sit and cry for hours, while James drank beer and watched TV. Living in that environment was terrifying, but Lorraine did small things to make life a bit more bearable. She quietly allowed me to spend some time with friends after school, knowing James wouldn't be home until later. Those brief moments of normalcy meant the world to me. Things took a turn for the worse when James lost his job. His frustration and anger skyrocketed, and the abuse intensified. One night, Lorraine had just finished making dinner, and James exploded, yelling about how the meal wasn't up to his standards. He threw his plate against the wall while Lorraine and I sat there, terrified. His drinking got worse, and the house became a mess of beer cans, which Lorraine had to clean up. During this time, I couldn't even hang out with friends without James questioning why I was late. When I turned 15, one of my classmates, Harry, confessed his feelings for me and asked me out on a date. I was nervous about James finding out, but as a teenager, I wanted to experience life beyond the confines of our stressful home. So, there I was, kind of unsure about the whole dating scene, but I decided to give it a shot and go out with Harry. We ended up meeting at this cute little coffee shop right after school one day, and we had such a great time just chatting and getting to know each other better. Honestly, going on that date was probably the best decision I've ever made. That's how Harry and I fell head over heels for each other. He was everything James wasn't: gentle, kind, and just an all-around great guy. He even adored animals, which was a huge plus in my book. Harry would save up his pocket money just to surprise me with my favorite flowers. I never really had a good role model, so I didn't expect much from Harry, but he treated me like a queen. James, on the other hand, was always paranoid and questioned me constantly about who I was hanging out with. I had to lie and pray he wouldn't find out the truth. Luckily, I didn't have a phone, so there were no text messages for him to snoop through. Harry and I were super cautious with our dates and didn't even tell our friends we were seeing each other, just to keep things on the down low. Harry totally got how scared I was of James and didn't mind keeping things hush-hush. When prom season rolled around, Harry and I both agreed to go together with our friends so we wouldn't raise any red flags. But when James found out, he was adamant that I couldn't go. He said prom was a waste of time and refused to even buy me a dress. I didn't care about the dress. I just wanted to have fun with my friends. I begged him, reminding him how I always got good grades like he wanted. But he just dismissed me, calling my friendships pointless and prom insignificant. We had a huge argument, and he went on about how teenagers didn't know right from wrong. He threatened to lock me out if I tried to sneak out. So, on the night of prom, I was the only one who didn't go, and I spent the entire night crying alone in my room. After high school, meeting up with Harry became even harder because I still didn't have a phone and wasn't allowed to go out much. I asked James if I could get a phone since I was heading to college soon, and everyone had one. He told me if I wanted a phone, I had to buy it myself. So, I got a part-time job to earn some money and gain a bit of independence. It also gave me an excuse to see Harry without James knowing and just say I was at work. Then came the best news ever. I got accepted into an Ivy League university with a full-ride scholarship. This was huge because no one from my town had ever gotten in. James was so proud, telling everyone about my achievement, even though he never actually congratulated me to my face. But I didn't care, I was just relieved. With this big win, James had nothing to complain about. He was so happy he even bought me a phone and told me to save my job money for college expenses. For the first time, he also let me hang out with my friends after work, and I finally got to enjoy some freedom. Harry and I knew college would mean less time together, but we promised to see each other whenever we could. We were intimate a couple of times, always being very careful. But then, about 2 weeks later, I noticed some weird symptoms, like my period, but without actually getting it. Plus, I started craving food at random times. Panicking, I told Harry we needed to do some pregnancy tests. We did 3 tests, and they all came back positive. I was so shocked I collapsed, crying. It felt like my worst nightmare. Harry comforted me as best as he could, but I couldn't stop shaking. I just knew James would kill me if he found out I was pregnant right before college. Harry reassured me that he would support me no matter what. He said he'd talk to his parents, and then we'd break the news to James together. Harry's parents were amazingly understanding. His mom hugged me and told me not to worry too much, saying this kind of thing happens to everyone. They agreed to come over to talk to James. When we finally told Lorraine and James, they were stunned. Lorraine asked me twice if I was sure, and I confirmed it, having taken multiple tests. James exploded in anger, yelling that this is why he never wanted to adopt kids from strangers, because you never know their character. He called me a bunch of horrible names, which just made everything worse. So, I'm not going to go through it all again, but basically, it was a nightmare. Harry's parents were trying to keep things calm while James was losing his mind, blaming everything on Harry. It looked like he might actually get physical, and poor Harry was just sitting quietly in the corner. That's when I broke down and started crying. I told James I wasn't planning on keeping the baby anyway, so he didn't need to worry. I tried to reassure him that everything would go back to normal, and I'd head off to college as we had planned. Lorraine then told James they needed to talk privately, so they left the room. I was left there, a crying mess, while Harry's folks gave me sympathetic looks. Eventually, Lorraine and James came back, and Lorraine's words hit me like a ton of bricks. She suggested that I carry the baby to term and then hand over my parental rights to them. She said the baby was a gift from God and urged me not to consider any other options. James backed her up and said it would be best, especially since Lorraine was already pregnant herself. I was completely baffled. James explained that they had just found out Lorraine was pregnant, but had kept it to themselves. Now, with me also being pregnant, they figured they could raise both kids together. The shock of it all left me speechless, and Harry's parents were just as stunned. They immediately voiced their disapproval, but James shut them down, saying it wasn't their decision to make. James looked at me, expecting an A answer, and I was a bundle of nerves. But deep down, I knew I couldn't agree to this. The thought of giving my baby up to be raised by them was unbearable. Lorraine had been a caring mother in many ways, but she couldn't stand up to James, and I couldn't risk my child's safety in that environment. I cherished the idea of being a mom one day, but the timing and circumstances were all wrong. I told James firmly that I couldn't go through with the pregnancy. I wasn't mentally or physically strong enough, and the idea of watching my child grow up as a sibling while pretending it wasn't mine was heartbreaking. Lorraine started crying, saying she was disappointed I couldn't do this for her after all she had sacrificed for me. James looked furious, pacing the room. I tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen. Harry's mom backed me up and offered to make an appointment with a gynecologist for me, which made Lorraine cry even harder and James start yelling, asking if I was happy now that I was hurting her. James told me to pack my things and leave, calling me ungrateful and selfish. Harry's parents gently suggested I pack quickly before things got worse. I ran upstairs and grabbed important documents, photos, and some clothes. As I came back down, James warned me to take everything I needed because he'd be burning the rest. Lorraine wouldn't even look at me. As I walked out, James told me never to come back. It was like they disowned me in an instant, and I felt like I meant nothing to them. I went home with Harry and his parents, who kindly offered me a place to stay. The next few days were a blur. They took me to the gynecologist, and we scheduled the procedure. It was a tough decision for both me and Harry, but we knew it was the best choice for our futures. After the procedure, I spent days recovering, with Harry by my side the entire time. He and his parents took care of me the best they could. James and Lorraine never contacted me. When it was time for me to move to college, I texted James, hoping he had forgiven me, but he replied with harsh words, calling me a failure and a disappointment, saying I had become a prostitute and he wanted nothing to do with me or his biological kid. His words hurt deeply, and I cried for hours. They were the only parents I knew, and now they had abandoned me just as they were having their own children. College was tough but rewarding. I had to work part-time to cover my expenses and studied hard to keep my grades up. It was a struggle, but I was determined to succeed. Harry stuck by me through it all, visiting whenever he could. His unwavering support kept me going. During holidays, his parents invited me over, and they started to feel more like my family. I graduated with honors, and Harry and his parents were there to cheer me on. Despite everything, I had made it through, and their support meant the world to me. During my graduation ceremony, I had one of those rare, golden moments in life. I landed a sweet, cushy job right in my field, and it felt like all my hard work had finally paid off. It was a really proud moment for me. Not long after that, Harry and I decided to take a big step in our relationship and moved in together. Over time, our bond only grew stronger. We stood by each other through all the ups and downs that life threw at us. After several years of being together, we decided it was time to take the ultimate leap and get married. Our wedding day was nothing short of magical, a beautiful celebration of our love and commitment, surrounded by our closest friends and family. Honestly, the idea of inviting James and Lorraine to our wedding didn't even cross my mind. As a married couple, Harry and I have spent years building a wonderful life together. Recently, we made a big move and bought another house, choosing to rent out our first home. We've transformed this new place into our cozy sanctuary, a perfect spot to create new memories and plan for the future. We chose this location mainly to be closer to Harry's parents, who are getting older. They've become like parents to me too, and I want to take care of them however I can. It's been nearly 20 years since James and Lorraine kicked me out, and honestly, I hardly think about them anymore. Throughout all these years, I haven't really bothered with them, even though I spent my first year of college crying and missing them a lot. By my second year, I realized this was my chance to build a new life free from their rejection, so I made myself stop thinking about them altogether. It hurt a lot, and it took tons of strength to build this life on my own. They never bothered to call me, and I never checked in with them either. Through all this time, Harry has been my rock-me partner in every sense of the word. We never had kids, but we do have 2 dogs that we absolutely adore. We visit Harry's parents every other weekend, regularly go on trips, and love exploring new restaurants together. All in all, my life has turned out pretty great, and I wish I could go back and hug my 17-year-old self for worrying so much about the future. Recently, I got a friend request on Facebook from a guy named Matt, who had a very familiar surname. When I opened his profile, I was shocked to see how much he resembled James. I accepted his request, and he sent me a message saying hello, so I replied back. Then he asked if I knew someone named James and Lorraine. My heart skipped a beat as I realized he was their son. I was nervous but decided to be honest. I told him that I did know them since they had adopted me when I was 5 years old. Matt was really excited and told me he had always known his parents had another child before him because he had seen my pictures in the family photo album. However, every time he asked them about it, they refused to give him any information. He said he had been searching for me for a long time and had luckily stumbled onto my profile recently. He had no other reason to contact me except to know the truth. Feeling conflicted but knowing I had to be honest, I recounted the painful events of my past. I told him how his parents had asked me to give up my child for them, and when I didn't comply, they kicked me out. I explained how they had been absent from my life all these years, and the only reason I survived was because of the kindness and support of Harry's parents. It was a difficult conversation, filled with raw emotions and painful memories I had kept hidden for so long. Matt listened attentively, absorbing every word. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. Matt eventually told me he had no idea his parents had treated me so cruelly. He always assumed I had run away, because that's what they had told everyone back in our hometown. He was genuinely shocked and thanked me for my honesty. He even apologized on behalf of his parents, expressing regret for the pain they had caused me. After our conversation, I felt grateful that Matt had made the effort to reach out to me. His understanding and support brought me a sense of comfort and validation. However, I couldn't shake the worry about how James and Lorraine would react once they found out I had shared the truth with Matt. Did I do the right thing by telling him, or should I have kept quiet? Update 1. Just a quick update, I was right to be worried. Within 24 hours, I received multiple calls and texts from James and Lorraine. I've never changed my number, so it was easy for them to find me. Their messages were filled with anger, calling me various names, and accusing me of betraying their trust by sharing our family secrets. James messaged me, saying I should have kept my mouth shut and not come between him and his son. Feeling completely overwhelmed, I've been avoiding their calls and messages, unsure how to handle this sudden confrontation. Update 2. I finally told Harry about everything. He had no idea Matt had recti. He'd out to me. When he found out that I had spilled the beans, he thought I shouldn't have done that. So, let me clarify something right off the bat. It wasn't that telling the truth was inherently wrong or anything like that. The main issue was that he believed James had completely lost his marbles, and this would only stir up more unnecessary drama in our lives. Anyway, I had a deep conversation with Matt about everything that had been going down. He filled me in on what happened after we talked. Apparently, he confronted James and Lorraine about the whole situation. They, of course, tried to deny everything. They called me a liar and painted me as this selfish person who used them until I could run off to college. Classic, right? But here's the twist: Matt didn't buy their nonsense for a second. He told them to keep their distance from his kids and dropped the bombshell that he wouldn't be helping them out financially anymore. That must have stung. Then, Matt shared something really heartwarming. He and his wife had recently adopted twins, but guess what? James and Lorraine weren't exactly throwing a welcome party. They refused to visit the kids and acted so cold about the whole thing. This made Matt start questioning their behavior, though they brushed off his concerns at first. After reaching out to me and getting the lowdown on my past, Matt finally connected the dots. He realized why James and Lorraine were acting all sour about him adopting his children. He admitted he had no clue they would lash out at me the way they did and promised to tell them to back off. To be honest, he was pretty sweet about it. He even invited me to come visit his twins whenever I had the time, saying that no matter how his parents treated me, he would always love to get to know me better because, hey, we're siblings after all. That was really touching. After my conversation with Ma, TT, I felt a lot better, honestly. I was totally surprised by how kind and different he was compared to James and Lorraine. I'm seriously considering taking up his offer and visiting his children one of these days with my husband. Okay, so here's an update. It's been about 7 months since my last note, and since a bunch of you have been asking for it, here we go. I took the big step to block James and Lorraine from all communication channels. Freedom! No more threatening messages from them. I can finally breathe easy. Matt stepped in and talked to them as well, so I'm sure that played a part in them backing off. In these past few months, Harry and I have visited Matt and his wife at least 4 times. Each visit has been so heartwarming. They've welcomed us with open arms. We've spent hours catching up, sharing stories, and bonding over our childhood experiences. It's been pretty therapeutic. Plus, I've gotten to hang out with Matt's twins, who are absolute bundles of joy. They have such vibrant energy, it's infectious. I'm genuinely grateful that Matt reached out to me. I'm thrilled about the newfound connection with him and his family. It's helped me heal from old wounds, and right now, I feel more at peace than I have in a long time.